I never thought a single glance could make the air around me feel like it was holding its breath until I saw her that evening. She was standing by the window, the soft golden light catching the strands of hair that fell perfectly around her face. 40 years old, she carried herself with the kind of quiet elegance that made the room feel smaller, warmer, more intimate, like the world had shrunk to just her and the space she moved through. There was something about the way she tilted her head, a subtle hesitation in her stance, that made her approachable yet untouchable all at once. I stayed back, pretending to adjust the papers in my hands, but I wasn't really looking at them. My eyes kept drifting, tracing the curve of her shoulder as she reached for the vase on the table. I caught the faintest scent of her perfume, something soft, floral, maybe jasmine, and it tugged at my chest in a way that felt too heavy for my own calm. "You're staring," she said, almost whispering, though she didn't look at me. She just let the words float over her shoulder. There was no accusation, just that curious, knowing tone that made my pulse skip. "I wasn't," I said, though my voice sounded smaller than intended. My fingers brushed hers as I handed her a notebook. It was accidental, at least I told myself that. But the warmth of her hand lingered against mine longer than it should have. Too long. She turned to face me fully then, eyes locking with mine. 40, yes, but all the years had left her with a quiet, commanding grace. She smiled, but only slightly, the kind of smile that didn't give much away. And somehow, that tiny curve of her lips had the weight of a confession. "I'm not wearing this for anyone else," she said, voice low, almost hesitant, as if daring me to notice the truth in it. Her fingers fiddled briefly with the hem of her dress, and I realized I'd been holding my breath, counting each subtle movement, memorizing the way the fabric clung, the way the color caught the light. "Then don't change," I said before I could think better of it. The words came out softer than I intended, but the tension between us sharpened. She blinked once, just once, and that was enough. A silent acknowledgement that we both understood something we hadn't yet dared to speak aloud. The room felt smaller, tighter, like the air itself had been charged with some current neither of us could see. Every small movement she made, brushing a stray hair from her face, shifting her weight, the way she leaned ever so slightly toward me, pressed against a sense of closeness I couldn't name, couldn't touch, but couldn't ignore. I wanted to say more. I wanted to bridge the invisible distance, but the words stuck somewhere between my throat and my chest. Instead, I let my gaze linger a fraction too long, memorizing the lines of her face, the way her eyes softened when they met mine, the way she seemed to notice me noticing her. And then the moment broke, sudden and jarring. The sharp creak of the front door swinging open somewhere behind us. My heart jumped, and I realized we weren't alone in the house. She looked past me, her posture stiffening just slightly, her eyes narrowing, and for a heartbeat, everything hung between us. The unspoken confession, the heat of proximity, the fragile possibility that had only just begun to spark. And I knew, whatever this was, whatever tension had been simmering in the quiet of that room, it wasn't going to end here. I caught her by the staircase, pretending to check the railing, but really, I was just trying to make sense of the pull between us. She leaned lightly against the banister, one hand trailing down, fingertips brushing the wood with a rhythm I couldn't name. 40, she carried herself like someone who had lived, who had lost and loved and learned. And yet there was a softness now, a quiet hesitation that made her human in a way I couldn't stop noticing. I had thought I understood loneliness before. The hollow afternoons, the half-empty dinners, the silent phone that never rang. But standing here, watching her shift her weight, noticing the subtle tremor in her fingers as she reached for a glass of water, I realized I hadn't understood it at all, not until I saw it mirrored in her, contained behind her impeccable composure. "You always notice everything," she said, almost teasing, almost a warning, as her gaze flicked to mine. The corner of her mouth lifted briefly, but her eyes told a different story, wary, vulnerable, and aware. "I don't notice everything," I said, though I could feel the lie pressing against my lips. I noticed the faint scar along her wrist, the way her perfume lingered like a whisper even when she stepped away, the way her laughter caught and held the space between us. There was risk here, of course. 100 subtle reasons whispered at the edges of my mind. Age, perception, the quiet judgment of anyone who might notice. But those reasons, like fragile threads, couldn't compete with the gravity of standing this close to her. She leaned toward me once, just enough that her hair brushed my shoulder, and I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. Then she pulled back, subtly, almost imperceptibly, as if testing the distance between us. She had been married once, briefly, a long time ago. I had overheard a fragment of a conversation about it months ago, a voice full of careful restraint. And I knew she had loved deeply, loved recklessly, perhaps, and had been hurt in ways that left her gentle but guarded. That past, layered and heavy, pressed against her now, coloring every movement, every glance, every breath that came too close to mine. I always wonder, she said softly, letting the words hang in the air, if people notice what they shouldn't, or see what they're not supposed to see. Her voice was so low that I leaned in without thinking, drawn closer by the weight of it. Our eyes locked, and I could feel it. The electricity, a quiet, impossible current threading between us. Her hand brushed against mine briefly as she shifted her weight, and the contact lingered just enough to leave a trace, a reminder that what we were feeling was mutual, undeniable, and terrifying. The moment stretched, unbroken. No words came. No excuses, no explanations. Just the slow, deliberate rhythm of proximity. A pause that was loud in the quiet room, a fragile bridge between what had been and what might be. And in that silence, I realized something simple but terrifying. We had already begun to unravel each other. I was leaning against the counter, pretending to arrange the silverware, but really, I was just stealing glances at her. She was across the kitchen, stirring her coffee with a hand that trembled ever so slightly, the steam curling around her face like it was framing her. 40 years old, and yet she had this quiet magnetism that made every small movement feel deliberate, almost sensual, though she didn't intend it that way. She looked up, caught me staring, and for a heartbeat, the world shrank to that gaze. Her lips parted slightly, as if she had something to say but stopped herself. I swallowed hard, aware of the rising pulse in my neck, of the thrum in my chest that made my hands feel heavy, useless. A sudden ping from her phone broke the moment, a message lighting up her screen. She glanced down quickly, then back at me, and I felt the sharp twist of frustration at being interrupted, as though the universe itself had conspiring against us. But even that tiny break in rhythm only heightened the tension, the awareness that this closeness was precarious, delicate, forbidden in subtle ways. "You're quiet," she said softly, the edge of amusement in her voice barely concealing something deeper. She stepped closer under the guise of moving to the counter, and her shoulder brushed mine. Just a touch, brief, but it was enough to make my chest tighten. "Just thinking," I murmured, almost choking on the words. The thought of her, the way she leaned in slightly, how her hair tickled my face when she adjusted herself, it was impossible to contain. Her eyes softened, a slow smile tugging at the corner of her mouth, and I could see it there. The same pull, the same hesitation mirrored in her. She leaned in further, close enough that our breaths mingled, hot and faintly sweet with the aroma of her coffee. My hand twitched toward hers, then stopped midair, frozen by the awareness of how wrong it might seem. The sound of the door opening startled us. A friend's voice called out, distant but unmistakable, and she jerked back ever so slightly, her chest rising in a quiet, startled breath. I felt my own pulse hammering, the closeness vanishing in a heartbeat, leaving only the echo of what could have been. And then, just as quickly, she returned, closing the space between us again. Her hand brushed against mine under the counter, lingering. I didn't pull away this time. Our eyes met, long, loaded, unspoken words suspended in that tiny space. Every second stretched, every heartbeat loud, every suppressed confession pressing against the edges of what we dared not admit aloud. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The tension, the near touch, the almost kiss, it all said enough. And though we tried to resist, though both of us knew how fragile this was, somehow we found ourselves closer than ever, shoulder to shoulder, hand almost in hand, suspended in that delicious, dangerous balance of desire and restraint. And in that moment, I realized just how powerless we were against what had begun. I could feel it before I even understood what it was. The weight of her presence pressing into me, the subtle shift in the air that made my pulse hammer faster than reason allowed. She was closer than ever, leaning against the edge of the couch, fingers trailing absently over the fabric as if seeking anchor. 40 years old, composed, yet the flicker of vulnerability in her eyes betrayed everything she tried to hide. "I can't," she began, voice low, trembling slightly. She swallowed, paused, and then met my eyes. That pause, that brief, loaded silence, spoke more than words ever could. My chest tightened. My fingers itched to lift the strand of hair brushing her cheek, to tuck it behind her ear, to close the infinitesimal distance between us. "I don't know if I should be feeling this," she whispered, almost confessional, almost daring me to respond. "You don't have to stop," I murmured, voice barely above her own. My words were a promise and a plea, simultaneously reckless and necessary. I could feel the warmth of her body against mine, subtle but unmistakable, the brush of her elbow as she shifted, the way the scent of her skin clung to the air around us. Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, I thought she might pull away. But instead, she leaned in, ever so fractionally, and I felt the heat of her breath ghost across my cheek. My heart lurched, every beat loud in the quiet of the room. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words dissolved in the intensity of the moment. "Do you think this is wrong?" she asked, voice catching, almost breaking, though she tried to mask it. The question hung, weighty, impossible. I reached out, hand hovering near her hair, trembling with both fear and desire, terrified of crossing a line, yet desperate to close the space that had held us apart for far too long. Her lips parted slightly as if on the verge of a confession, a surrender, or maybe just a word that could shatter the fragile equilibrium between us. My breath hitched. My body moved closer without conscious thought, drawn like gravity towards something I had wanted for weeks, months, without daring to name it. Then, almost unbearably slow, I let my hand brush against her temple, fingertips skimming the fine strands of hair that had fallen over her face. She shivered at the contact, not pulling away, not yet, but enough to send my pulse skyrocketing. The tension had become unbearable, electric, a wire stretched taut between us. I could feel her leaning into me, just a whisper, a subtle weight that made the space we shared feel impossibly intimate. My lips were so close I could feel the warmth of her breath, and every nerve in my body screamed to close the last fraction of distance. And then she spoke, a single line, sharp, deliberate, almost a challenge. "Are you sure you want this?" The words hung in the air, heavy with promise and peril, and for a moment, time itself seemed to hold its breath. I wanted to answer. I wanted to do more than answer. But before I could, the moment stretched, suspended, fragile, as though the next second would decide everything. I thought I had read her like an open book, every glance, every subtle movement, every half-smile memorized. And then she spoke a line that pulled the ground out from under me. "I saw you at the cafe last week," she said softly, voice almost drowned in the hum of the late afternoon. My chest tightened before I could even form a response. "You didn't see me, but I saw you." I froze. My hand, mid-motion toward the counter, hovered in the air. She was standing closer than I realized, and the faint brush of her sleeve against my wrist sent a shiver through me that I couldn't hide. Her eyes studied me, careful, deliberate, and suddenly all the delicate control I had over my own reactions felt absurd. "You watched me?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper, the words heavy with a mixture of accusation and something I couldn't name. My pulse thrummed, every nerve alert. "No," she said, shaking her head. "Not like that. I just noticed. You weren't expecting me to notice. And maybe I liked that." Her hand brushed against mine again, this time a fraction longer, lingering on the subtle curve of my wrist, just enough to ignite the pull I hadn't thought I could feel stronger than ever. The revelation flipped everything. What had felt safe, a slow, quiet build between us, suddenly felt raw, exposed. The room seemed smaller, tighter, our proximity unbearable in its intensity. I could feel the heat of her shoulder against mine, her breath faintly mingling with mine as we hovered in the charged silence. "I shouldn't have," I started, but my words stumbled. I wanted to step back, regain control, pretend that I wasn't caught off guard by both her confession and the way my body betrayed me. But I didn't move. Not really. And maybe I didn't want to. She shifted closer anyway, almost imperceptibly, and the brush of her hand as she adjusted herself against me was like a spark to dry kindling. I wanted to pull her in, to cross the invisible line, but fear of judgment, fear of wrong timing, fear of what it all meant, kept me tethered, painfully aware of the space we were daring to bridge. Her eyes searched mine, soft, vulnerable, yet daring. "Do you feel it too?" she asked, voice low, tremulous. My throat tightened, my hands itched to answer more than words could. I could feel the tremor of anticipation, the heat of desire tempered by restraint, and the almost painful awareness that one false move could ruin the fragile intimacy we had built. For a moment, we just stood there, her presence pressing in, my body pulled toward her, and the unspoken truth hanging between us like a fragile thread. Desire and fear intertwined so completely I wasn't sure where one ended and the other began. And then she stepped just a fraction closer, brushing past me, her fingers grazing my hand as she passed. The contact was electric. My heart raced. The decision loomed, heavy, irresistible: move forward or step back and risk never finding this again. I knew, whatever came next, we could no longer pretend this was casual, safe, or avoidable. The room seemed impossibly small, the late afternoon light slicing through the blinds and casting narrow stripes across her face. I could feel her there, just inches from me, and every rational thought I had was drowned out by the pull of proximity, the quiet insistence of desire that had been building for weeks. She looked at me then, really looked, and I felt like she was seeing every inch of my hesitation, every flicker of longing I had tried to hide. 40 years of experience, of careful composure, yet in that gaze there was something tender, raw, and unfiltered, and I realized that I could no longer hide either. "I shouldn't," she began, voice low, a whisper meant only for me. But the sentence trailed off, unfinished, her hesitation mirrored in the faint tremor of her hands at her sides. I wanted to close the distance, to erase the space between us entirely, but I waited, just a heartbeat, letting the tension stretch, letting her make the choice too. Her breath brushed against my cheek as she leaned ever so slightly forward, and my own exhale caught in my throat. The scent of her perfume, soft and intimate, mingled with the warmth radiating from her skin, and I realized the full weight of what I wanted. Not just this, not just the nearness, but her. All of her, the vulnerability and the confidence, the teasing smiles and the guarded hesitation. "I don't care what anyone thinks," I whispered, letting my voice drop to the same hushed tone, letting the words wrap around her like a quiet promise. My hand lifted slowly, hovering near her temple, almost afraid to touch, almost desperate to. Her eyes softened, a flicker of relief and anticipation, and I felt it, the fragile tension ready to snap into something irrevocable. She shifted slightly, letting her shoulder press against mine, subtle, deliberate, a silent surrender that set every nerve in my body on fire. We didn't speak, because we didn't need to. Our breaths, the faint brush of fingers, the tilt of heads, all of it said more than words ever could. And then the choice became unavoidable. I closed the remaining distance, fingertips grazing her cheek, her eyes closing briefly at the contact, and my lips hovered near hers, suspended in a moment of pure, fragile inevitability. Every heartbeat screamed, every sense focused on the space between us. She tilted her head, and I felt it. The decision, the surrender, the acknowledgement that this was ours, messy and human and beautiful. Nothing else existed in that room but the two of us, finally unguarded, finally unafraid. When our lips met, just briefly, tentative yet charged, it was everything and nothing, a promise of what had been building, a question answered, a truth revealed. I felt her shiver against me, heard her quiet intake of breath, and knew in that instant that nothing could ever undo what we had discovered about each other. We pulled back slightly, foreheads touching, breaths mingling, and for the first time, fully, completely, we understood one another. The house was quiet now, the late afternoon sun fading to gold and amber, spilling across the floor like a soft blanket. We sat together on the couch, closer than ever, hands intertwined in a way that felt natural, inevitable. 40 years and 24 years, and yet here we were, past hesitation, past fear, past the unspoken judgments that had lingered in the air for weeks. Her head rested lightly on my shoulder, and I could feel the steady rhythm of her heartbeat against my chest. It was a simple, human thing, yet it carried more meaning than words could hold. I brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and she tilted her face toward me, eyes half closed, soft, tender. No words were necessary. The quiet closeness said everything. I was worried, she murmured, voice low, almost shy, though her hand tightened around mine just slightly, betraying the vulnerability she rarely showed. I know, I said softly, pressing my forehead to hers. But we're here. We figured it out. She let out a small, almost imperceptible sigh, a mixture of relief and disbelief, and I felt her lean closer, pressing her warmth fully against me. The space between us had disappeared, replaced by the slow, deliberate intimacy of two people who had taken the risk and found it worth everything. We laughed quietly at something trivial, and it felt enormous. A release, a reminder that life could be gentle too, even after tension and longing. Her hand moved over mine, fingers tracing the lines of my knuckles, and I marveled at the way someone could feel so familiar and yet so profoundly new. I didn't think it would ever, she began, but the sentence trailed off as she pressed a soft kiss to my temple. My lips found hers gently, a quiet affirmation, a seal on the journey we'd shared. The room smelled faintly of coffee and warm sunlight, her perfume lingering as a delicate echo of the closeness we had cultivated, and I realized that all the pauses, all the near misses, all the hesitations, they had led to this exact, human, imperfectly perfect moment. We didn't need to talk about age or expectations or what anyone else might think. We just existed together, fully present, breathing each other in, steady and sure. I rested my cheek against hers, feeling the rise and fall of her chest, the subtle warmth of her hand over mine, the quiet certainty that this, whatever it was ours. For a long while, we sat like that, no rush, no end, just closeness and understanding, a shared heartbeat between us. And somewhere deep down, I knew that no matter what the world might say, this, her, me, now, was enough. If you enjoyed this story, did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next? Would you like to see more slow burn, emotionally grounded romance like this, or something a little darker and mysterious?